Janet's going to come up and she's going to read for us the entirety of Genesis 42. And it's long, but I just feel like we have to read the entirety of these chapters. So here you go, Janet. It's right here if you want to.
Oh, great. Thank you. I was going to say my phone might die while we're reading this. Okay. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. And he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." They said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." He said to them, "No, it is the nakedness of the land that you have come to see." And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." And he put them all together in custody for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this, and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." And they did so. Then they said to one another, "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen, so now there comes a reckoning for his blood." They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. Then he turned away from them and wept. And he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound them before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to replace every man's money in his sack and to give them provisions for the journey. This was done for them. Then they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed. And as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money in the mouth of his sack. He said to his brothers, "My money has been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack." At this, their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came to Jacob, their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, "The man, the lord of the land, spoke roughly to us and took us to be spies of the land." But we said to him, "We are honest men. We have never been spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan." Then the man, the lord of the land, said to us, "By this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men. And I shall deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land." As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." Then Reuben said to his father, "Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Janet. All right, let me pray for our word, and then we'll jump in. Heavenly Father, God, we ask, Father, as we look at this passage and hear this story, Lord, of what you've done in the lives of Jacob and Joseph and his brothers, Father, that you might encourage and challenge us to consider our own perspectives, Father, towards our lives and how we view our own sinfulness and our own brokenness in light of what it is that you are doing. I pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. We are going to look at this passage here this afternoon. If you guys have ever watched the television series The Wire, it's an older HBO show. But basically what The Wire does is it looks at the same story in downtown Baltimore with a lot of gang violence and police activity. And it looks at the same story, but it does so from different perspectives, right? And so what it does is it's a very fascinating look at life in inner city Baltimore and why the different people interpret what's happening to them the way that they do. This is the same story here, but we have 3 different perspectives of these individuals. You've got the father Jacob, you've got Joseph, who's now one of the governors in Egypt, and you've got their brothers, or the sons of Jacob. And we're going to look at the 3 different perspectives that they bring as they look at what it is that God is doing in this situation. It's the same story, but 3 different perspectives. Because you see, we live in a world that views actions as the reason for our consequences, right? So if something bad happens to me, it's because of something often I believe I've done, right? And certainly that can be true, right? We certainly can live a life that is sinful. We can live a life that creates all sorts of havoc. But sometimes it's not as cut and dry as, you've done something bad and here you are, this bad thing has happened to you, right? Sometimes we are more products of our situation, our circumstances even, than we would like to admit. In the same way that Joseph's life was one of ups and downs, right? And it was all for God's purposes. It wasn't necessarily a result of his actions, right? But we see the same sort of lesson being lived out in the lives of Jacob and of the brothers, right? God's purposes and his outcomes ultimately derive from how he will be able to deliver his people from the brokenness that exists in this world. Let me say that again. God's purposes and his outcomes ultimately derive from how he will be able to deliver his people from the brokenness that exists in this world. So what we're going to do is we're going to look first at the life of Jacob. So we're going to kind of track it as we go here. We see Jacob in 2 sections, right? Jacob shows up first in this passage, and Jacob shows up at the very end, near verse 36. And what we see for Jacob is he still has a care for his family. In verse 1 was he say to the brothers, "Get up, go to Egypt," right? "There's a famine. I've heard there's food there. Why are you still here doing nothing?" Right? Go to Egypt, get the food. But what we see in this action is that he's still unwilling to send his youngest, Benjamin. Almost 15 years have passed here, and he's clearly still mourning the loss of Joseph, right? He's clearly he's mourning that he doesn't know what happened to him. He's gone. And now you've got Benjamin, who's also the blood brother, right? Directly related to Joseph. They have the same mother. If you remember, as we talked all the way back, there's these 4 different mothers that come from this. But Benjamin and Joseph both have the same mother and Rachel, and he doesn't want to lose him. So he basically says to the other 10, "You guys go," which is essentially like communicating to them, "I don't care really what happens to you, but I'm going to keep Benjamin here because I don't want to lose another one." And so there's this fear of losing Benjamin. But then we see at the end, in verse 36, when Jacob says, "All of this is coming against me. I've lost Joseph. Now I've lost Simeon." Simeon ends up having to stay behind with Joseph in Egypt. I've lost Simeon. And now you're going to take Benjamin from me? Right? So Jacob he's seeing the writing on the wall. I don't know why this is all happening to me, but my life is one that is wrought with loss. And you can almost feel it. He knows he's lost Joseph, he's lost Simeon, and if Benjamin goes, he's feeling that he will almost surely lose his youngest. And at this point, his favorite, because Joseph was originally his favorite, we're told in the text, but now here's this Benjamin who he refused to let go initially. The brothers have come back from Egypt, saying this ruler there is saying that the only way he can trust us is if you send your youngest brother. And Jacob's thinking, I'm going to lose all three of them. And we could say that Jacob is a bit of like the nihilist at this point. There's no purpose. There's no rhyme or reason for everything that's happened to me. My favorite wife, Rachel, had these two sons, and they're my favorite sons, and I've lost one, and I'm surely going to lose the other. What is the point of life? There is no hope. Jacob is seeing only the pain of losing his children. And from the perspective of Jacob, there is no happy ending. There is no hope. There is only a God who is putting him through difficult circumstances for what seems to be no purpose. And his response is, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol, which is basically just another way of saying, I have no hope. There is nothing left. Life is meaningless. It's just my sorrow that is here. And so this is the perspective that Jacob is viewing the circumstances and what is happening. At this point, verse 36, Jacob doesn't even care about the grain anymore. He doesn't care about the fact that there's a famine. He doesn't care about the fact that Egypt has food. I've lost these sons. What's the point? What's the purpose? There is no hope. Then we look at the perspective of the brothers. And as they look at this situation, as they look at what is happening, right? They immediately, as soon as trouble finds them, they go to Egypt. And Joseph starts to confront them. But Joseph's not revealing to them who he is. Right? Joseph sees them. He recognizes who they are. But at this point, Joseph would have been made up like an Egyptian. Right? Egyptian men had the headdresses. They had all sorts of gowns they would wear. Frankly, they would make their faces up with makeup often. So Joseph is going to look like a different person at this point. But he sees his brothers. They're still the same men. He recognizes who they are. And so he hides himself from them so that they don't know. But the brothers, as soon as these things start happening to them, as soon as Joseph looks at them and says, you're just here to see the famine that exists in this land. You're spies. You're seeing if there's anything that you can take advantage of us from. As soon as they hear this, right, they recognize, they say, we are being punished for what we have done against our brother, right? Their view of their sin is that they are being punished for what they have done. Verse 28, what is this that God has done to us? What they don't realize is God is working amidst all of this in the entire situation. But they're looking at this and saying, God is punishing us for what we have done. They say in verse 21, we saw the distress of our brother Joseph. He called out from us from the pit. It specifically says he begged of us, and we didn't listen. Right? We got this little snapshot into this moment. You could have guessed it, that Joseph is in the pit. Right? And that he's lifted out by the Midianite traders 3 or 4 chapters prior. You could have guessed that Joseph was, no, please, no, don't sell me, right? But you get a picture into the heartache that happened there. They looked at their brother who had done nothing wrong. They just hated him for being their father's favorite, but he hadn't actually done anything wrong. And they sold him into slavery. Meanwhile, he's crying out to them saying, no, don't. And they say, we are being punished for this. We saw the distress of our brother. The Lord is coming after us. 15 or so years later, we can't run from our sin. What do they say to Joseph? They say we are honest men. But then in verse 11, they also say, in truth, we are guilty. So that, they don't acknowledge to Joseph. They don't think he knows the situation. But they say, no, we're honest men. We're not here to lie, steal, cheat. No, none of that. We're not spies. But they know in their hearts their own guilt. They know in their hearts what they have done wrong. They know their infractions. And they're discussing this amongst one another. I think one of the things that we have to recognize in this is that when you sin and you feel the consequences of that sin, if your heart is unrepentant for what it has done, you will have this sort of reaction that his brothers are having. Oh, shoot, we've been caught. We're being punished because of how we acted. But if your heart is one that's repentant, you will not see the consequences of your sin as something which condemns you, but rather as something which drives you closer towards the Lord. What would have been a reaction of these brothers had they recognized that they cannot run from their sin? They hadn't seen it as an, oh shoot, we've been caught by God. They would have seen it as, I need to take ownership of this, responsibility for this. Remember, when they go back to Jacob and they tell him what has happened, they don't say to Jacob, and here's why this is happening. We sold Joseph into slavery. They don't ever tell Jacob what happened, which tells you that their hearts are not truly repentant for what has occurred. Their hearts are just in a moment where, oh shoot, I've been caught in my sin and God is coming after me. If our hearts are unrepentant for our sin, then when consequences fall upon us, they are not seen as God's mercies for delivering us from that, for using that as a means to restore us back to the Lord, but rather the consequences that fall upon us will feel like condemnation. There may be consequences on this side of eternity as a result of the sins we've committed, but what does Hebrews 12 tell us? For those whom the Lord loves, he is using those situations as a means of restoration, not punishment. The Lord loves whom he chastens. But you can only know this is restoration when your heart is one which seeks that restoration, which seeks to come before the Lord and say, there is nothing I can offer, there is nothing I can bring. It's the only way. And we see furthermore, what really kind of brings this all to the surface is the weakness of Reuben, the eldest son. He's the one who should have said, he should have taken the ownership for it. I never should have let you sell Joseph into slavery. I should have been more firm in standing up for Joseph. But the best he can offer his brothers is to say to them, I told you so. I told you we shouldn't have sold him into slavery. See, if you listen to me, this would never have happened. And what does he say to Jacob later on? He says, if we don't bring Benjamin back, kill my two sons, take their life. What good does that do, Jacob? Right? You've lost all these sons. Here, now take your grandsons too. Murder them. How weak is his response? And it's actually later on, and you'll see here in the next couple weeks, that it's Judah who actually takes ownership for it, right? And his response to Jacob. And what it points to is the fact that from the line of Judah comes the one who doesn't say, if things don't work out, pin it on these guys, but rather says, because of the sin of the people, put it on me. We're We're told that Christ comes from the line of Judah. And Judah, in his actions, the way he responds to Jacob in the next chapter or two, point to Christ who is to come. What the brothers ought to have said, right, is acknowledge their sin before Jacob, not try to run from it or hide from it, and say, whatever happens to us happens, but we have been restored before the Lord because of our willingness to acknowledge our own sin. But instead, that isn't how they respond, and they seek to continue running from it. So you have Jacob, you have his viewpoint, you got the brothers, and then you round it out here. You see the perspective of Joseph. The first thing we see in this passage from Joseph is that the brothers come in verse 6, and they bow down to him. And you've got to think, from the perspective of Joseph, there's got to be so much vindication that happens at this point, because you remember, he's now predicted, and it's come true, the dreams of the baker and the cupbearer. He's predicted, and is the middle of it, the dream coming true with Pharaoh and his 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and they're in the famine right now, and he's seen it. So he's going, all right, I have these other dreams, and my brother is bowing down to me. When's this one coming, right? And here they come in. And in verse 6, we're told that they bow down to him. He sees his brothers, but in his wisdom, he treats them like strangers, and he speaks roughly with them. Now, I do think there is an aspect of this in which Joseph is seeking to hide himself from his brothers. But I think we'd also be lying. There's the way this passage is written, it's very real and raw emotion, right? There's not a whole lot of hiding what has occurred here. I think we'd be lying to say that part of his treating them like strangers and speaking roughly to them, there is some bitterness in his heart towards them that he's trying to work through. It's part of why he's communicating to them in that way. And how could you not, right? I think we would all feel very vindicated and justified. I had this dream. My brothers were going to bow down to me. They sold me into slavery. I've got them. And we're told in verse 9 that he remembered the dreams. He sees them bow down. He remembers them. And the fact that he accuses them of being spies, what he's ultimately doing is highlighting that he's in a position of power and authority over his brothers. And so what we'll see ultimately from Joseph, I think, is that there is truly a desire for reconciliation and bringing them together. But at least initially, there is a sense here of, you have to think, and when he first sees his brothers, there is some bitterness that comes out. And I think we have reason to see that and think that here from what we see happening in the text. What you also have to remember here is they say that the youngest is with our father. So Joseph, he's putting the puzzle pieces together. Wait, my father I was his favorite, and he didn't want anything to happen to me. And then something happens to me, and these 10, he sends, but he keeps one. Joseph is putting 2 and 2 together and realizing that Benjamin, they are related. We don't necessarily know whether or not Benjamin was around beforehand, but given the time period that had elapsed, it's unlikely that he was. And so he's looking at this going, oh, this is probably my brother. And it's one of the reasons why he wants him brought to them. He wants the brothers to bring Benjamin to him. But then when he says to them, right, he accuses them of being spies, and he tells them, you need to leave one of your brothers here essentially as collateral, so that if you leave here and don't come back, I have him. He knows, he ultimately does not trust his brothers, and frankly, nor should he. He does not trust his brothers, and so he's causing them to have to leave one of the brothers as collateral for what has happened. But we also see not just sort of the side of Joseph that is trying to finagle his way through this situation and get where it ultimately needs to get, but also the very human side of Joseph. We're told in verse 24, and this is one of 3 times that pops up here in this chapter and the next few, that he turns and he weeps, right? Because Joseph is speaking through an interpreter to his brothers. They don't know that he can speak their language. And so he's hearing them say, oh, we're being punished because we sold our brother into slavery. God's punishing us now, right? He's hearing all of this, and he knows exactly what's being said. But he's not letting on. And he doesn't want there to be any deception that they figure out who he is. And so we're told that he turns and he weeps. We see the pain, the heartache, the loss that Joseph is ultimately feeling. And I think for Joseph also, the picture is becoming clearer to him of what it is that God has been seeking to accomplish in this situation. Joseph is seeing, okay, the dreams that God gave me, there was nothing I had done to have all this come upon me. And I went down into Egypt, down into the pit, down into Egypt, down into prison. And then I've risen back up. Now I'm a governor in the land of Egypt. I have the ability to make sure that my family is fed and cared for. The picture is becoming clearer for Joseph at this point. And he fills their bags with grain. But not just that, but also puts their money back in it for them. And we learn a little lesson about, I think, forgiveness in this time. Right? What Joseph is communicating by giving the money, there's one, he wants his brothers to feel where did this money come from, right? They're going to think we stole it. They've already accused us of being spies, let alone being thieves. But furthermore, Joseph knows that he's eventually going to reveal himself to his brothers. And there's a very real sense of, when I forgive you, your debt to me could never truly be repaid. My forgiveness of you, brothers, is one that I have absorbed that debt. There's nothing you can do to pay me back. You sold me into slavery, and now not only am I giving you your food to eat, but I'm giving you your money back on top of that. This is what the forgiveness of the Lord looks like in our lives. When we sin against God, right, and God sends Christ to die on our behalf, right, and we find salvation in the Lord, it's not just that we've been forgiven, but our bags have been filled with money, which we can never repay. Joseph is seeing God's sovereignty in this situation. It's something which God seeks to do. The way that Joseph is relating to his brothers is how God relates to us in our own brokenness, in our own sinfulness before him. And I think where we kind of tie all of this together is to recognize that God is using the same way that God used the famine in Egypt as a means of restoring the broken relationships in that family, as a means of bringing the nation of Israel to Egypt so that not only could they be fed, but they would grow and they would be made whole. God used those circumstances, and he used what looked like a terrible situation in Joseph's lives. He used what looked like to the brothers, like God punishing them for what it is that they had done. He's using all of those situations, all of the famine, all of the hunger. He's using it as a means of bringing together that family and delivering his people. And in that same way, we as humans, we are hungry. Right? We talked about it earlier. Our hearts, they go after false idols. They go after things which cannot satisfy. They go after things which we think will fill us up, but they cannot. And God is taking the situations in our lives as we live in our own famine-induced state. And he seeks to use those situations as a means of restoring us, as a means of bringing us closer towards him. And if your heart and your response is like the brothers, oh shoot, I didn't get away with the sin that I wanted to get away with. If that's your heart, then when God works in our lives amidst the famine, it will be condemnation. But if your heart is one which seeks to say, Lord, I have nothing to offer, I have nothing to bring. You are my only hope in this life. You are my own, Christ is my only hope for salvation. What the Lord does is he takes your bag, and not only does he fill it with grain, but he fills it with money you can never repay. When difficult times come upon us due to our sin, the Lord seeks to use those times of famine to bring us towards him, not to drive us away. And it may feel in the moment as if God is punishing you. It may feel in the moment as if he is using those circumstances to drive you away from him. But we see in this story that God is actually using those situations as a means of restoration, as a means of making you whole, because God's intent, his hope, and his desire for his people is that he bring them home. Let's pray. I encourage you, take a moment, bow your heads, and consider the ways in which maybe who do you most identify with in this story? Do you identify with Joseph? Do you identify with the brothers? Do you identify with Jacob? Who do you most identify with? And consider, how is God maybe trying to work through those situations as a means of restoring you, bringing you towards him? And I just encourage you to be in silent prayer and confession here for a few moments, speaking with your Lord about this. May the Lord, who works all things for the good of those who love him, be with you as you go from this place. May you seek him in all that you do, so there may be peace and unity with you and your Creator. Amen. Go in his peace.